I want a divorce. 4 words. Delivered over a $300 bottle of champagne on their 5th anniversary. Julian Whitlock didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Serena Vaughn's hand froze halfway to her glass. The emerald silk dress she'd chosen specifically because he'd once said it made her look like a queen suddenly felt like a costume. The rooftop restaurant, private table, string quartet, white roses imported from Ecuador, blurred at the edges. What? Her voice came out steady, too steady. Now he looked up, green eyes cold as winter. I want a divorce, Serena. I've already had my lawyers draw up the papers. He slid a manila envelope across the tablecloth like he was closing a business deal. Not ending a marriage, not destroying 5 years, just paperwork. Tonight? She heard herself ask. You're doing this tonight? It seemed cleaner this way, public place, civilized. He sipped his scotch. I've met someone else, someone who fits better with where I'm going. Fits better. Translation. Younger, whiter, less complicated. His assistant, 24, blonde, always at his side at company events, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm just a second too long. Serena had asked about her once. Julian had called her paranoid, made her feel crazy for noticing. And now, on their anniversary, in a restaurant she'd reserved 3 months ago, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's rent, he was confirming every instinct she'd suppressed. The settlement is generous, Julian continued, scrolling through his phone even now. You keep the penthouse, the Hamptons house, and a very comfortable cash payout. My lawyers made sure everything is fair. Fair. Like fairness could be calculated in real estate and wire transfers. Like 5 years of her life, her youth, her trust, her love, could be itemized on a spreadsheet. Serena looked at the envelope, at the man she'd married, at the future she'd imagined dissolving in real time. She'd planned this dinner for weeks, had a gift wrapped and ready, vintage cufflinks from an estate sale, the ones he'd admired months ago before losing interest in anything she said. She'd hoped tonight would be different, that maybe the distance between them could be bridged, that maybe he'd remember why he'd flown her to Paris on their 1st anniversary, just to watch her face light up at the Eiffel Tower. Instead, he was throwing her away for someone younger, someone who fit better. Sign tonight if you want, Julian said, finally putting his phone down. Or take time to review with your lawyer. Either way, I'm moving forward. I've already moved my things out. Moved out. He'd packed, left, planned this execution, all while she was choosing dresses and making reservations. Serena picked up the envelope, felt its weight, felt the weight of everything ending. She should scream, throw the champagne, make a scene. Instead, she did something Julian never expected. She smiled, calm, cold, devastating. Okay. His eyebrows raised slightly. He'd expected tears, begging, drama. Serena opened her clutch and pulled out a pen, the Mont Blanc he'd given her on their 1st anniversary, back when gifts meant something. She signed every page without reading them, slid the papers back across the table, stood. Her hand didn't shake when she signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Congratulations, Julian. You're free. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, heels clicking on marble, back straight as a blade. The city lights blurred through tears she refused to let fall until she was alone. In the back of a cab, phone pressed to her ear, she finally broke. Daddy? Her voice cracked. He wants a divorce. For someone else. On the other end of the line, in a glass tower overlooking Silicon Valley, Malcolm Vaughn closed his laptop. His daughter was crying. Someone had made his daughter cry. Come home, baby girl, he said quietly. Come home. Julian Whitlock had no idea what he just set in motion, but he was about to find out. Because Serena Vaughn wasn't just the wife he discarded, she was Malcolm Vaughn's only daughter. And Malcolm Vaughn didn't forgive. he dismantled. If you love stories about underestimated women, powerful fathers, and watching arrogant people face consequences they never saw coming, you're in exactly the right place. Hit that subscribe button because crafting these detailed revenge stories takes serious time and research. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. 6 months earlier, Serena Vaughn had still believed her marriage could be saved. She'd been trying. God, she'd been trying. Therapy appointments Julian always had conflicts for. Date nights he'd cancel last minute. Conversations that started with, "We need to talk," and ended with him checking emails on his phone. But she kept trying because that's who Serena was. A fighter. Always had been. She'd grown up in Palo Alto, California, the daughter of Malcolm Vaughn, though you'd never know it from looking at her childhood. While her father was building VirtueNet Technologies from a garage into a $50 billion empire, Serena was going to public school, wearing Target clothes, doing her own homework without tutors. Malcolm had been intentional about that. "I want you to know what the world really is," he'd told her when she was 10, asking why they didn't live in a mansion like her classmates' family. Not the version money creates, the real one. So Serena had grown up normal. Brilliant, driven, but normal. Full scholarship to Columbia studying marketing and psychology. Graduated summa cum laude. Built her career at a boutique agency in Manhattan, climbing from junior associate to creative director in 5 years through pure talent. She'd never used her father's name, never wanted people to know, wanted to be seen for what she'd built, not who she was born to. That's how she'd met Julian. At a charity gala she'd helped plan for a client. He'd been the most magnetic person in the room, tall, handsome, old money elegant in his Tom Ford tux. He'd approached her while she was coordinating with caterers. "You're not a guest," he'd observed. "I'm working." "Then you're the most beautiful person working here." The line was cheesy, but his smile was genuine, or seemed to be. They'd talked for 3 hours after the event ended. He was a hedge fund manager, came from Connecticut wealth, had a mind that moved as fast as hers. He made her laugh, made her feel seen. 3 months later, he'd proposed on a beach in Turks and Caicos. The wedding was elegant, small. Her father had attended quietly, staying in the background, meeting Julian only briefly. "You sure about this one?" Malcolm had asked her the night before the wedding. "I love him, Daddy." That's not what I asked. But she'd been sure, or convinced herself she was. The first 3 years had been good, great even. They were a power couple, her rising agency career, his successful fund, 2 ambitious people building a life together. Then cracks appeared, small at first. Julian started talking about her stepping back from work when they had kids. Started questioning why she works so hard when "we don't need the money." Started introducing her as "my wife" instead of by name at events. Started suggesting she'd be more comfortable if she dressed differently, talked less about work, smiled more. Started coming home later, phone always locked, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. The assistant, Meredith, appeared in year 4. 24, blonde, ambitious. Always finding reasons to text Julian on weekends. Always at company dinners where spouses weren't invited. Serena had confronted him once. "You're being paranoid," he'd said. Made her feel crazy. "Meredith is an employee. You're my wife. Stop creating problems that don't exist." She'd believed him, or wanted to. Tried harder to be the wife he seemed to want. Lost pieces of herself in the process. Stopped mentioning her father's world. Stopped talking about her own ambitions. Stopped asking Julian to actually see her. Until that anniversary dinner. Until he'd finally said what his actions had been screaming for 2 years. Until he'd made it clear she was disposable. Replaceable. Not enough. Serena had walked out of that restaurant broken. But breaking isn't the same as broken, and Julian Whitlock was about to learn the difference. Julian Whitlock had been raised to believe the world was his birthright. 34 years old. third-generation money, Greenwich prep school, Yale legacy admission, a trust fund that meant he'd never actually worried about anything real. His hedge fund, Whitlock Capital Management, was successful, but not because Julian was a genius. It was successful because his family's name opened doors, because old money invested with old money, because the system was designed to keep people like him winning. He was handsome in that generic wealthy way, tall, fit because he had a personal trainer, well-dressed because he had a stylist, charming when he needed to be. But beneath the polish was something hollow. Julian measured worth in things: cars, watches, addresses, women. Serena had been impressive when he'd met her. Beautiful, brilliant, successful on her own terms. Dating her had felt like acquiring something valuable. Look at Julian Whitlock with this stunning black woman who's actually smart, who built her own career, who doesn't need his money. It made him look evolved, progressive, deep. The first years had been good because Serena had been independent, had her own life, didn't require much maintenance. But then Julian started actually expecting her to be a wife in the traditional sense, to prioritize his career over hers, to make him the center of her universe, to be decorative and supportive rather than ambitious and challenging. When she didn't automatically transform into that fantasy, he started resenting her. Her success felt like competition. Her intelligence felt like judgment. Her independence felt like rejection. So he'd started withdrawing, emotionally first, then physically. Meredith had been convenient. She'd started as his assistant 2 years ago, fresh out of business school, eager, grateful for the opportunity. She'd looked at Julian like he was the most important person in the world because, to her, he was. He controlled her career, her paycheck, her future. The affair started gradually, late nights at the office that became drinks, drinks that became hotels, hotels that became regular. Meredith was easy, agreed with everything he said, made him feel powerful and important, didn't challenge him or have her own opinions, was young enough to be impressed by things that didn't actually matter. She was also white, blonde, and from a good family in Connecticut, exactly what Julian's parents had always hoped he'd marry. They'd never said it explicitly, but Julian had felt their hesitation when he'd introduced Serena. The slightly too long pauses, the questions about her background, the relief in his mother's voice when he'd mentioned Serena's father only did something in tech without explaining exactly who Malcolm Vaughn was. Julian had enjoyed keeping that secret, enjoyed that Serena had insisted on privacy about her father's wealth. It meant Julian could maintain his narrative of having chosen her despite her being self-made rather than because of any family advantage. It let him feel magnanimous. But lately even that had stopped mattering. He wanted out, wanted to trade in for the newer model, wanted to stop pretending he valued ambition in a woman when what he really wanted was decoration. The divorce had been planned for months. He'd consulted lawyers, moved money quietly, ensured everything was structured to minimize his losses. The anniversary dinner had been calculated, public enough that Serena wouldn't make a scene, but intimate enough to feel personal. He'd expected tears, maybe some begging, eventually acceptance. What he got was that cold smile and a signature. It had unsettled him slightly, but only slightly. Julian had poured himself another scotch after she left, texted Meredith that it was done, and felt relief. He was free, clean break, moving forward with someone who actually fit his life. His phone buzzed. Meredith, I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to celebrate properly. Julian smiled. He had no idea that across the country, in a minimalist office in Silicon Valley, Malcolm Vaughn was making a very different kind of call. To lawyers, investigators, board members of companies Julian thought were his allies. The machine was already in motion, and Julian Whitlock, who'd spent his entire life assuming money and connections made him untouchable, was about to discover exactly how wrong he was. If someone you loved asked for a divorce on your anniversary, would you sign immediately like Serena did, or would you fight for the relationship? What would you do? What Julian had never bothered to learn about his wife was who her father actually was. He knew the basics. Malcolm Vaughn, tech entrepreneur, successful but private. Serena had mentioned he'd started a company in the 90s, that he preferred staying out of the spotlight, that they were close but she didn't like mixing family and professional life. Julian had assumed this meant Malcolm was comfortable but not significant, maybe worth $50 million, maybe owned a nice house in California, nothing that mattered in Julian's world of hedge funds and Connecticut estates. He'd never Googled him, never asked detailed questions, never cared enough to look deeper. That ignorance was about to cost him everything. Malcolm Vaughn had built VirtueNet Technologies from nothing in 1993, started in a garage with code he'd written himself, networking software that would become the backbone of internet infrastructure. By 2000, VirtueNet was worth $8 billion. By 2010, $30 billion. By now, $50 billion and growing. Malcolm owned 80% of it, had never taken it fully public, maintained control through a complex structure of private holdings, strategic partnerships, and investments that touched almost every major tech company in existence. He wasn't Forbes famous because he'd made sure he wasn't. Turned down interviews, skipped conferences, let his CTO be the public face while Malcolm operated from the shadows. But in Silicon Valley, in investment circles, among people who actually built things rather than just managing money, Malcolm Vaughn was a legend, a genius who'd revolutionized networking, a strategist who saw trends 5 years before they happened, a man who could make or break companies with a single phone call. And he was fiercely, intensely protective of exactly one thing: his daughter. Serena had been his world after her mother died when she was 12. He'd raised her alone, taught her to be strong, independent, brilliant, encouraged her to build her own life, never pushed his wealth on her, respected her desire for privacy. But he'd also always been watching, quietly, from a distance, making sure she was safe, happy, treated well. He'd had reservations about Julian from the beginning, something about the way the man talked about Serena, like she was an achievement, not a person, like he'd won something. But Serena had loved him, so Malcolm had stayed back, waited, watched Julian slowly diminish his daughter, watched the light fade from her eyes at family dinners, watched her smile become performative, watched her stop talking about her work, her dreams, herself. Malcolm had been patient, hopeful it would improve. Then Serena had called him crying on their anniversary, and patience ended. Malcolm Vaughn sat in his office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley, screens displaying real-time data from markets worldwide, a command center disguised as minimalist elegance. He pulled up Julian Whitlock's complete profile, everything: financial records, business relationships, professional history, personal indiscretions. It took 3 hours to map every vulnerability. By dawn, Malcolm had made 17 calls. By the following week, Julian's world would start crumbling. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. Because Malcolm Vaughn didn't destroy people loudly, he dismantled them systematically, legally, permanently. And Julian Whitlock had just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd hurt Malcolm's daughter. Julian noticed something was wrong exactly 9 days after the divorce signing. His morning started normally: coffee, quick workout with his trainer, shower while checking markets on his phone. Meredith had stayed over. She'd moved in within 48 hours of Serena leaving and was still asleep in his bed. His bed. He'd already started thinking of the penthouse as entirely his, even though technically the divorce wasn't final for 60 days. He was scrolling through emails when he saw it. Investment Committee Quarterly Review. From Thornhill Partners, one of his fund's largest institutional investors. $450 million under management, backbone of Whitlock Capital. Julian opened it expecting routine update requests. Instead, Julian, after careful review of our portfolio allocations and strategic priorities, Thornhill will be withdrawing our investment from Whitlock Capital Management, effective end of quarter. We appreciate your management over the past 4 years and wish you success moving forward. Best regards, Richard Thornhill. Julian read it twice. Withdrawing? $450 million leaving? That would require rebalancing the entire fund, liquidating positions, possibly triggering redemption clauses with other investors. He called Richard immediately. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Tried Richard's office line. His assistant said he was unavailable and would return the call when possible. Julian felt the first flutter of real concern. This was unusual. Thornhill had been with him since the fund's inception. Richard had golfed with Julian's father. There had been zero indication of dissatisfaction. He pushed it aside. Probably internal politics at Thornhill. Nothing to do with him personally. Then the second email arrived. BlackRock subsidiary. $280 million invested. Same message. Different words, same meaning. We're out. Then a third. Sovereign Wealth Fund. $190 million. By noon, Julian had received withdrawal notices from 6 major investors, representing $1.3 billion of his $2.8 billion fund. Nearly half his assets. Gone. Within hours. His hands were shaking when his head trader knocked on his office door. "We need to talk about the redemptions," Marcus said, face grim. "If we liquidate these positions in the current market, we're looking at significant losses. The timing is terrible." "I know the timing is terrible," Julian snapped. "Why is this happening?" Marcus shrugged. "No idea. I've never seen coordinated redemptions like this. It's like they all decided simultaneously." He trailed off. Julian felt cold spreading through his chest. Coordinated? No, that was paranoid thinking. These were sophisticated institutional investors making independent decisions based on their own internal factors. It was coincidence, bad luck, market conditions. It couldn't be. His phone rang. His father. "Have you seen the Wall Street Journal?" Gerald Whitlock's voice was tight. "No, why?" "There's an item in the morning notes, small thing, but it mentions Whitlock Capital seeing significant investor exodus and questions about management decisions." "Who the hell talked to the press?" Julian pulled up the journal on his computer. There it was, buried in the market news roundup, just a paragraph, but devastating. Whitlock Capital Management, the $2.8 billion hedge fund managed by Julian Whitlock, has reportedly lost several major institutional investors this week, raising questions about the fund's strategy and leadership. Sources suggest concerns about risk management and firm direction. Sources. What sources? Who was talking? "This is a disaster," his father continued. "The club is buzzing about it. I've had 3 calls this morning asking if Whitlock Capital is in trouble." "It's not in trouble, it's just normal investor rebalancing." "Half your fund doesn't disappear in one morning because of rebalancing, Julian. Something is happening. Figure out what it is and fix it. Our name is on this." His father hung up. Julian sat in his office, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked Manhattan, and felt the first real threat of fear. This couldn't be connected to Serena, could it? No, that was insane. She was a marketing executive. Smart, but she didn't have this kind of reach. Didn't know these investors. Couldn't possibly coordinate something like this. Could she? He pulled up her number, hesitated, deleted it. He was being paranoid. This was just bad luck. Really bad luck. All happening at once. Right after he'd filed for divorce. Complete coincidence, right? Malcolm Vaughn didn't make the calls himself. He never did. That's not how power worked at his level. Instead, he'd simply made his position known to the right people. Let information flow through channels that existed specifically for this purpose. Allowed the system to do what systems do when someone with his influence decides someone else is a problem. The first call had been to David Chen, CEO of Thornhill Partners. "David, I'm calling about Whitlock Capital Management." "Malcolm?" David's voice was surprised. "I didn't know you tracked hedge funds." "I don't, usually, but I've recently learned some concerning information about their management practices. Risk controls that aren't what they claim, relationships with certain investments that might interest regulatory attention." "Are you saying?" "I'm saying you might want to review your exposure there, carefully, before it becomes a problem." That was all it took. David Chen was smart enough to read between the lines. If Malcolm Vaughn was suggesting there might be regulatory issues with a fund, there probably were. And if Malcolm was bothering to call about it, that meant Malcolm had an interest in seeing that fund fail. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of Malcolm Vaughn's interests. Thornhill's withdrawal notice went out the next morning. The second call had been to a board member at BlackRock. The third to a sovereign wealth fund manager Malcolm had helped years ago with a tech investment that had returned 400%. He didn't threaten, didn't demand, just provided information and concern and let intelligent people draw their own conclusions. By day 3, the exodus was organic. Investors talked to each other, heard rumors, saw the Wall Street Journal item, decided independently they'd swear that Whitlock Capital was too risky right now. The journal item had been easy. Malcolm knew the markets editor, had provided background information about concerns in the hedge fund sector, with Julian's fund as a specific example. All factual, all documented, all perfectly legal. The editor had run it because it was newsworthy, not because Malcolm had asked. That's how you destroyed someone without leaving fingerprints. You didn't lie, didn't fabricate, just highlighted truths that were inconvenient. Let the system's own mechanisms do the actual damage. Malcolm sat in his home office in Palo Alto, watching the markets, monitoring the ripple effects of what he'd set in motion. Serena was asleep upstairs. She'd been staying with him since the anniversary dinner. Quiet, withdrawn, healing slowly. She didn't know what he was doing. He hadn't told her. She wouldn't have wanted him to. Would have said she could handle it herself. Would have been too proud to let Daddy fight her battles. But Malcolm didn't see this as fighting her battle. He saw it as correcting an error, removing a problem, ensuring the natural order was restored. Julian Whitlock had mistaken kindness for weakness, had thought Malcolm's absence from Serena's life meant indifference. Fatal mistake. Malcolm's phone buzzed. His head of security, former FBI, now running a private intelligence firm that did work for VirtueNet. "We've completed the background check you requested on Julian Whitlock and Meredith Crane." "And?" "Whitlock's cleaner than expected. No criminal history, but the financial analysis shows some interesting patterns. Aggressive tax strategies that might not survive IRS scrutiny. Some offshore accounts that aren't properly disclosed. Nothing prosecutable, but enough to create problems if the right people started asking questions." "And Crane?" "More interesting. She's not who she claims to be. The business school degree is real, but her family background is fabricated. Name change at 18. Sealed juvenile records in Connecticut. I can't access those without a warrant, but the fact that they exist and she didn't disclose them on her employment applications, that's a problem." Malcolm smiled slightly. "Send me everything, encrypted." "Already done." He opened the files, started reading, started mapping the next phase. Because the investor exodus was just the beginning. Next came the regulatory scrutiny, the IRS audit, the questions about offshore accounts, the media attention on his relationship with an assistant who'd lied on her employment application. Then the civil suits from investors who'd lost money when the fund collapsed. Then the social exile. Then the complete dismantling of Julian Whitlock's carefully constructed life. All perfectly legal, all perfectly justified, all perfectly devastating. Malcolm Vaughn had built an empire by being smarter, faster, and more strategic than everyone else. Now he was using those same skills to destroy the man who'd hurt his daughter. And it was working beautifully. Was Malcolm right to intervene on Serena's behalf? Or should he have let her handle the divorce herself? When is it okay for a parent to step in? Serena discovered what her father was doing 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner. She'd been staying at Malcolm's house, the Palo Alto estate she'd grown up in, now feeling both comforting and claustrophobic. Her father had given her space, let her process, asked nothing except, "Are you eating? And did you sleep?" She'd been numb mostly, moving through days in a fog, taking leave from work, avoiding social media where her friends were probably talking, avoiding everything. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Serena, it's Catherine Moss." Her former roommate from Columbia, now a financial journalist at Bloomberg. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you okay?" "I'm managing. Why?" "Have you seen the news about Julian's fund?" Serena's chest tightened. "No, I've been offline." "His fund is collapsing, like completely imploding. Investor exodus, regulatory scrutiny, rumors about offshore accounts. It's everywhere. Financial press, gossip columns, even criminal investigation whispers." The words didn't make sense. "What? When?" "Started about 2 weeks ago. I'm working on a piece about it. I wanted to give you a heads up before it runs. And, Serena, some people are saying this didn't happen organically, that someone with serious power orchestrated it." Serena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Who?" "Nobody knows. But the speed, the coordination, the simultaneous regulatory and media attention. This is someone with reach." After hanging up, Serena sat in the kitchen of her childhood home and started connecting dots she'd been too hurt to see. The timing, right after the anniversary dinner, right after she'd called her father crying. The precision. This wasn't random bad luck. This was systematic. She pulled out her laptop and started searching, found the Wall Street Journal item, the Bloomberg coverage, the regulatory filings, the investor withdrawals. Then found something else, a connection between 3 of Julian's major former investors and VirtueNet Technologies. Business relationships, board seats, partnerships, people who would take a call from Malcolm Vaughn, people who would listen if Malcolm suggested there might be problems somewhere. "Oh, Daddy," she whispered, "what did you do?" She found Malcolm in his home office, screens glowing with data, coffee going cold on his desk. "You destroyed Julian's fund." It wasn't a question. Malcolm looked up, didn't deny it. "I made some phone calls." "You did more than make calls. You orchestrated a complete financial collapse." "I provided information to investors who deserved to know about risk factors they hadn't considered." "Stop." Serena's voice was sharp. "Don't do the corporate speak with me. You destroyed him. Deliberately." Malcolm set down his coffee. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he hurt you. So you decided to ruin his entire life?" "I decided to ensure he faced consequences for his choices. That's different." Serena paced, emotions warring. Part of her was horrified at what her father had done. Part of her was satisfied, vindicated, seeing Julian suffer what she'd suffered. "You should have told me," she said finally. "You would have said no." "Exactly, because it's my life, my pain, my choice how to handle it. And if I'd asked permission, Julian would still be living his best life with his mistress while you cried yourself to sleep." Malcolm's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm your father. Protecting you isn't something I need permission for." "I'm not a child." "You're my child. That doesn't stop when you turn 18 or 30 or 50. Someone hurt you. I responded. That's what fathers do. Serena felt tears coming. I didn't want you to fix this for me. I'm not fixing it for you. I'm holding him accountable. You were already strong, already healing. This isn't about making you whole. It's about ensuring he doesn't get to walk away without consequences. They stood in silence, the house settling around them. The same house where Malcolm had taught her chess, told her she could be anything, raised her to be fierce and independent, and now used his power to protect her. What else did you do? Serena asked quietly. Malcolm pulled up files on his screen. Want to see? She shouldn't. She should walk away, maintain moral high ground, prove she didn't need revenge. Instead, she pulled up a chair. Show me everything. Malcolm turned the screen toward her. Files, emails, financial trails, timelines. Serena scanned them in silence for 10 minutes. Then she pointed at one document. This offshore entity, he used it to hide bonuses from me during the marriage. Malcolm nodded. Serena's jaw tightened. Send me a copy of that one, and the employment records on Meredith. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I'm not just going to watch you burn his world down, she said quietly. I'm going to make sure he knows exactly who lit the match. That night, from her childhood bedroom, Serena created a new, anonymous email address. She attached the offshore documents and Meredith's fabricated background check. She sent them to 3 financial journalists she trusted, ones who owed her favors from her agency days. No note, no demands, just the files. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was ensuring the truth had more than one messenger. The IRS audit notice arrived at Julian's office on a Tuesday. Standard language about routine examination and documentation requests. Nothing alarming on its surface. Except Julian knew his tax strategies weren't exactly clean. They were legal, technically, but aggressive enough that they relied on nobody looking too closely. Now somebody was looking. Then the SEC inquiry arrived. Questions about trading patterns, requests for communications, interest in certain offshore entities. Then the employment discrimination lawsuit. Former employee claiming hostile work environment and retaliation. Someone Julian had fired 2 years ago and paid to go away quietly. Except now she wasn't quiet, had lawyers, was filing publicly, and mentioning Meredith, specifically, saying Julian had a pattern of inappropriate relationships with young female employees. His lawyers were suddenly very busy and very expensive. Meredith was panicking. This is insane, she said, pacing his, penthouse. It's like everything is hitting at once. It'll be fine, Julian said, pouring scotch with shaking hands. These things happen. We just need to manage it. But he didn't believe himself, because it wasn't fine. His fund had lost 60% of its assets. The remaining investors were nervous. Quarterly returns were terrible because he'd had to liquidate positions quickly, taking losses. The Connecticut club had postponed his membership renewal. His parents weren't returning calls. His brother had sent a terse text. You're embarrassing the family. Fix it. And the media was circling. First it was financial press, then lifestyle blogs, then worse, social media. Someone had connected dots. Julian Whitlock, disgraced hedge fund manager, had divorced his wife right before his fund collapsed. His wife was Serena Vaughn. Her father was Malcolm Vaughn, the tech billionaire Malcolm Vaughn. Julian's stomach dropped when he saw the first think piece. Did a tech titan destroy a hedge fund manager for divorcing his daughter? The article was careful, speculative, no hard evidence, but it laid out the timeline, the connections, the suspicious coordination. Comment sections exploded. If I was worth $50 billion and someone hurt my daughter, I'd do worse. He divorced her on their anniversary for his assistant. He deserved this. This is what happens when mediocre men underestimate powerful women. Julian became a meme, a cautionary tale. The stupid man who divorced a billionaire's daughter and lost everything. He tried fighting back, had his PR team issue statements, tried to paint himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-father-in-law. It made things worse, because the deeper journalists dug, the more they found. The offshore accounts, the aggressive tax strategies, the pattern of relationships with assistants, the employment discrimination. Julian wasn't sympathetic. He was exactly what he looked like, a privileged man who thought he was untouchable, and the public loved watching him fall. Meredith left on a Thursday. "I can't do this," she said, bags already packed. "The media, the legal stuff, the money problems, this isn't what I signed up for." "You signed up for me," Julian said desperately. "I signed up for rich, successful, powerful you, not broke, disgraced, under investigation you." She paused at the door. "I'm sorry, but I have to think about my career." Her career? As what? An assistant who'd slept with her married boss? But she was gone before he could point that out. Julian sat alone in the penthouse that was now too expensive, looking at bills he couldn't pay, facing legal battles he couldn't afford, watching his life disintegrate in real time. And for the first time, he understood what he'd actually lost. Not just a wife, not just a marriage, but someone who'd actually loved him, who'd tried to make it work, who'd been brilliant and beautiful and his partner. Someone he'd thrown away because he'd thought he could upgrade. He'd been an idiot, and now he was paying for it. Every day, in every way. While somewhere in California, Serena Vaughn was healing, moving forward, building a life that had nothing to do with him. And her father, the man Julian had never bothered to Google, was systematically ensuring Julian would never forget the mistake he'd made. 6 months after the anniversary dinner, Julian Whitlock filed for bankruptcy. Not personal bankruptcy, not yet, but Whitlock Capital Management ceased operations, liquidated remaining assets, returned what little was left to investors after legal fees, penalties, and forced settlements. His reputation in finance was destroyed. Nobody would hire him. Nobody would invest with him. His name was poison. The penthouse sold, at a loss, in a rush, to cover mounting legal bills. He moved into a studio apartment in Queens. Not terrible, just ordinary. Small. Nothing like what he'd had. The cars were repoed. The watches sold. The club memberships lapsed. His parents helped financially, minimally, reluctantly, with conditions about getting his life together. The IRS settlement took 3 years off his life and most of his remaining liquid assets. The SEC fine was smaller but still devastating. The employment discrimination suit settled for an undisclosed amount that Julian's lawyer said was generous given the circumstances. He got a job, compliance officer at a small investment firm, entry level despite his experience, $120,000 salary, decent for most people, humiliating for someone who'd made $5 million a year managing a hedge fund. His boss was younger than him, less educated, less experienced, but employed while Julian was desperate. He took the job and swallowed his pride. Meredith, predictably, never called after she left. He'd seen her Instagram once. She was engaged to someone else already, a tech executive, older, stable, actually rich. She'd moved on like Julian had never existed, just like he'd done to Serena. The irony wasn't lost on him. His social circle evaporated completely. Former friends stopped returning calls. Invitations dried up. The life he'd built, the network, the status, the access, all gone. He became a cautionary tale whispered in Greenwich Country Club locker rooms and Yale alumni chats. At a coffee shop near his Queens apartment, he once ran into an old Yale classmate, now a successful VC. The man looked right through him, then pretended to take a phone call to avoid speaking. His dating profile, when he finally tried, got matches, until women Googled his name, then ghosted. One sent a single message, Hard pass on the meme guy. He was nobody. Worse than nobody. The guy everyone pointed to as a warning. Don't be like Julian Whitlock. One night, drunk on cheap wine in his Queen studio, Julian did what he'd been avoiding for months. He Googled Serena, found her LinkedIn. She'd left her agency, started her own consultancy, was thriving based on the client list and press mentions. Found her Instagram, public now, no longer private, photos of her at industry events, launching new campaigns, looking happy, genuinely happy. No mention of him, no reference to their marriage, no sign that he'd ever mattered. He'd been erased from her narrative. He found one interview she'd done with a women's business magazine. The hardest lesson I learned was that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. I spent years making myself smaller to fit someone else's vision. When that ended, I discovered I'd always been enough. More than enough. I just needed to remember. She'd never mentioned his name. Didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Julian closed his laptop and sat in the dark. He'd thought he was trading up, thought Serena was replaceable, thought he deserved better. Instead, he'd thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him for an illusion that vanished the moment things got hard. And her father, the man Julian had been too arrogant to research, too dismissive to respect, had ensured Julian would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what he'd lost. Malcolm Vaughn had never called him, never threatened, never even acknowledged Julian's existence. He just quietly, methodically, thoroughly destroyed him. And the worst part? It was all Julian's fault. Every bit of it. The divorce, the affair, the arrogance, the assumption that he was untouchable. He'd built his own destruction. Malcolm had just lit the match. 8 months after the anniversary, Julian thought he had one last card to play. A journalist from a major financial outlet reached out. Interested in your side of the story, Julian saw his chance. Redemption, sympathy, a way to paint Malcolm Vaughn as the villain and himself as the victim of billionaire overreach. He met the reporter in a midtown cafe, poured out a carefully rehearsed narrative, vindictive ex-father-in-law, coordinated attack, abuse of power. He even hinted at filing a lawsuit against Malcolm for tortious interference. The reporter listened, nodded, took notes. The article came out 3 days later. Headline: Disgraced hedge fund manager claims tech billionaire destroyed him, but records show years of shady deals and workplace misconduct. It wasn't the hit piece Julian expected. The journalist had done actual reporting, dug into the offshore accounts, talked to former employees, obtained the discrimination lawsuit filings, interviewed Meredith, who, facing her own career fallout, confirmed the affair and threw Julian under the bus entirely. The piece ended with a quote from an anonymous source close to Serena Vaughn. Some men build their lives on sand and blame the tide when it washes away. Julian's phone exploded, not with support, but with fresh condemnation. His remaining job interview was canceled that afternoon. His parents finally cut him off completely. Even the compliance firm that employed him parted ways by end of week. He realized, too late, that the journalist had never been his ally. Someone, Serena or Malcolm, had tipped them off, fed them the real story. Let Julian hang himself with his own words. He'd reached for a lifeline and grasped a noose. There was no counterattack left, only surrender. 2 years after the anniversary dinner, Serena Vaughn spoke at a Women in Business conference in San Francisco. She wore confidence like armor now, stood on stage in front of 3,000 people, and told her story. Not all of it, not the personal details, but the shape of it, the lesson. I spent years making myself fit someone else's definition of acceptable, she said. Made myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious, because I thought that's what partnership meant, compromise. The audience was silent, listening. But compromise isn't the same as erasure, and I'd erased myself trying to save something that wasn't worth saving. She talked about starting her own consultancy, about building something that was entirely hers, about choosing clients who valued her expertise, her vision, her voice. The best revenge isn't destruction, she said. It's becoming so completely yourself that you forget you ever needed revenge. Standing ovation. 3 minutes. Afterward, women lined up to talk to her, to thank her, to tell her their own stories of shrinking and eventually growing back. One woman, maybe 30, said, "My boyfriend keeps asking me to turn down promotions so I don't make more than him. I've been considering it." Serena looked at her. Really looked. "Do you love your work?" "I love it." "Then don't dim your light for someone who's intimidated by brightness. Find someone who wants to shine beside you, not someone who needs you dulled to feel big." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Serena had a dozen more conversations like that. Women choosing themselves. Women learning their worth. Women refusing to shrink. That night she had dinner with her father at his favorite small Italian place in Palo Alto. "I saw your speech online," Malcolm said. "You were magnificent." "Thanks, Daddy. You've built something remarkable." "We've built something remarkable," she smiled. "I know what you did. All of it. The calls, the coordination, the systematic demolition." Malcolm didn't deny it. And I should probably be mad, should say you overstepped, should maintain some moral high ground about handling my own problems. But I'm not, because you didn't do it to control me. You did it because he hurt me and you couldn't stand it. And honestly, watching him face actual consequences for once, that helped me heal. Malcolm reached across the table, took her hand. "You would have been fine without me intervening." "I know, but I'm better because you did." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. "Have you heard anything about Julian?" she asked eventually. "He's still in New York, compliance work, small apartment, ordinary life." "Good. Not good that he was suffering, good that he was ordinary, that the illusion of superiority had been shattered, that he'd learned, finally, painfully, that other people had value beyond what they could provide him." "Do you ever regret it?" Malcolm asked. "The marriage?" Serena thought about it. Really thought. "No, because it taught me something crucial. I don't need someone to complete me. I'm already complete. I just need someone who appreciates that." "And have you found that?" She smiled mysteriously. There was someone, a professor she'd met at a consulting project. Smart, kind, fascinated by her mind as much as anything else. They were taking it slow, building something real. But that was hers, private, sacred in its ordinariness. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." Malcolm smiled. "Good. You deserve happiness." "I know. I finally know." That's the real victory. Not watching your ex suffer, but becoming so completely yourself that their opinion and their mistakes become irrelevant to your narrative. Serena didn't just heal because Julian fell. She healed because she chose to rise. By building her empire, by ensuring the truth reached the light on her own terms, by refusing to let his betrayal define her worth. Malcolm removed the obstacle. Serena built the empire. Together, they made sure justice wasn't silent. Choose yourself. Build yourself. Love yourself enough to walk away from anyone who needs you smaller. And if you're lucky enough to have people who love you fiercely, let them clear the path sometimes. Then run. Do you think Serena's healing required watching Julian face consequences? Or could she have moved on without that? Can you truly heal from betrayal without seeing justice? The invitation was simple, elegant. You are cordially invited to the celebration of Vaughn Consultancy's 5th anniversary. Serena held it in her office, the corner suite in a building her company now owned outright. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, her name on the door, Her team of 40 brilliant people building campaigns that actually mattered. She hadn't planned to invite Julian, but her assistant had asked if she wanted to send an invitation to former colleagues and associates, and his name had appeared on a list generated from her old contacts. She'd hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, then checked yes. Not because she wanted to hurt him, because she wanted him to see what she'd built without him, despite him, because of learning she didn't need him. He didn't come. She didn't expect him to, but he sent flowers, white roses, the ones he'd given her on their first date. The card said, "Congratulations on everything you've built. You always deserve more than I gave you. I'm sorry I couldn't be the man you needed. Jay." Serena read it once, felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even closure. Just distance. The emotional distance of time and growth and becoming someone new. She handed the card to her assistant. "File this somewhere, or throw it away. I don't care." The celebration was beautiful. Clients, employees, industry friends, her father beaming with pride in the corner. And David Chen, the professor, who'd become her partner in the realest sense, someone who celebrated her ambition instead of fearing it, who pushed her to think bigger, who loved her completely without needing her smaller. They'd been married for 8 months. Small ceremony, private, just family and close friends. This time, she'd chosen right. During the speeches, Malcolm stood up. "I want to say something about my daughter," he said. 5 years ago, she went through something that would have broken most people. Instead, she built something extraordinary, not because she needed to prove anything to anyone, but because she finally stopped letting other people's limitations define her possibilities. He raised his glass. "To Serena, who taught me that sometimes the best thing a father can do is step back and watch his daughter become unstoppable." Everyone drank. Serena hugged her father, whispered, "Thank you for everything." "You did this yourself," Malcolm said. "We both know that's not entirely true. The part that matters is true. I just removed an obstacle. You built the empire." That night in her beautiful home with her partner and her life that was entirely, completely hers, Serena thought about Julian Whitlock for the last time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with gratitude. Because his betrayal had freed her to become herself. And herself was magnificent. Here's what Serena's story teaches us about love, power, and knowing your worth. Being underestimated can be a gift. Not because it doesn't hurt, it does, but because it reveals who actually sees you versus who just sees what you can do for them. Julian loved the idea of Serena, successful, beautiful, impressive enough to make him look good, but he never actually saw her, never valued her, never understood that her worth wasn't tied to how well she fit his life. When she didn't transform into the quiet, supportive wife his ego needed, he discarded her for someone younger, easier, less threatening. He thought he was trading up. He was actually throwing away the only person who genuinely loved him despite his flaws. That mistake cost him everything. Not because Malcolm destroyed him out of spite, though he absolutely destroyed him, but because Julian had built his life on shallow foundations. Status, appearance, networks that only existed as long as he was winning. When those foundations cracked, everything collapsed. And there was no one to catch him because he'd never built real relationships, just transactions. Meanwhile, Serena, who'd been genuinely loved, genuinely supported, genuinely seen, rebuilt herself into something stronger. The lesson isn't, have a billionaire father to destroy your enemies. Most of us don't. It's this. Your worth isn't determined by who chooses you. It's determined by who you choose to be. Serena could have stayed broken, could have let Julian's betrayal define her, could have shrunk and accepted that maybe she wasn't enough. Instead, she remembered she'd always been enough, built a life that proved it, found love that matched her instead of diminished her. That's power, not revenge, not destruction, Just refusing to let someone else's inability to love you properly become your definition of lovable. 5 years later, Julian was ordinary. Serena was extraordinary. Not because of what her father did to Julian, because of what she built for herself. That's the real victory. Not watching your ex suffer, but becoming so completely yourself that their opinion stops mattering entirely. Choose yourself. Build yourself. Love yourself enough to walk away from anyone who needs you smaller. The rest is just details. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in choosing yourself, refusing to shrink, and building a life worthy of your worth, smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment about a time you chose yourself over someone who needed you smaller. And hit like if you think Serena handled this with the perfect balance of grace and growth. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, the best revenge is becoming so extraordinary that your betrayer becomes irrelevant to your narrative.